Okay, so welcome to lecture number 12 on the mobile application development. Just confirm if I'm audible and my screen is visible. Just confirm once in the chat box so we can start. Yeah. Today our entire focus will be on the implicit intents. So we said that there are two types of intents. One is the implicit intent and another is the explicit intent. The explicit intent that we already seen. So if you want to launch some other component and we know the name of that component, then we will be using the explicit intent. But when we don't know the name of the other component, what we basically had is the implicit intent. Now, since we don't know the name of the destination component in case of the implicit intents, we said that we have to provide some additional information. Now, the additional information such as the action to be performed or the operation to be performed on the data, then what kind of data we have, and additionally sometimes you require the additional information that is called as extras, which is nothing but the extra data. Now, here are some standard action that I have specified which Android knows already. Then other than that, you have the data type, the type of data that you want to operate on. So basically, if you want to open a gallery, you will be specifying the image type as possibly image slash star or video slash star. Okay, so it will support any kind of video, any kind of image. Possibly, if you want to make your app to be opened in browser, you'll be possibly identifying the type as HTTP slash star. Okay, so basically the type defines the MIME type. Now the data. So basically the data defines the actual data on which you are going to perform the operation, or the actual data which is to be shared among the two different applications. Now in case of implicit intent, it has the most important existence. The reason behind this is the data helps much to identifying the destination component. And the thing that you have to always remember regarding to data is it must be specified in terms of URI. It must be specified in terms of the URI. So some standard URI options we have given here. So if HTTP is there, it's basically use a browser to open the data. If TEL colon is there, it specifies the telephone number. It will specifically launch either a dialer or a call application. If your data is starting with geo colon, okay, so geo colon, then it will possibly open the app which basically displays the map, because the geo specifies here the geolocation. Not necessary it will open the Google Maps, okay, but even if you have some other map applications such as Here Maps or any other kind of maps, it will open that particular application. Then if you want to view the contacts or if you want to edit the contacts, then the corresponding URI is content colon slash slash contacts slash people, and the person or the ID of the contact that you want to view or edit, that should be specified here. That's why I have mentioned this in a curly bracket. The reason behind this is basically this is nothing but the specific ID of that contact or specific ID of that particular person. Now always remember, this ID is always in form of integer. This is always in form of the integer. Then the next thing that we have, we can launch an email application. Just the thing is, you need to change the URI or the data URI to mail to, and you can also launch the Android market. That's basically App Store. You can specifically view the application here. So you have to specify the application fully qualified name in front of the ID. Okay, so these are the three important things that you have to give. So action is must, you have to give it. Type is optional. Sometimes you can give it, even if you don't specify, in some cases it's okay with that. Then data is again essentially required. Sometimes it is not required, but most of the times data is again the essential. Specifying the data URI is essential. Now extras. So when we have launched the destination application, that's okay. So but if you want to send some data to the destination application, you have to provide that data with the help of extras. Now with this information, we'll try to code some most of the common intents. So we'll try to code most of the common intents now. Okay, that will help you to build your apps. So let's try to create our Android project first, and then we'll see which are the most common intents available and how to code them. So let's start with the Android project. So I'll call it as a demo common intents. Okay, now remember this particular application or this particular demo is only related to the implicit intents. Let me maximize it. So as you can see, the Gradle build is finished, and what we have here is basically a blank app that we have created, which currently doesn't contain any of the developer written code. Now what we have to code today is the most common intents. So what we'll have here is the app user interface in such a way that for each intent we'll be creating a button. Okay, so for example, for launching a dialer there will be a separate button. For making a call there is a separate button. For launching a SMS there will be separate button. So there are n number of buttons for launching n number of common intents, so that we can identify which button will launch which particular intent, and we can identify each separate intent at the same time. So let's try to write the first intent, that's a launching a dialer. Okay, so for that we'll be adding a button. Okay, now since we require n number of buttons, I think the better layout for this particular coding is basically a table layout. Now, so when we go on adding the buttons one by one, okay, they will be arranged in terms of the table. Okay, so let's make a table row, and what we'll have here is in one table row I'll take 3 buttons. So let's take one button, and for this particular button I'll be calling it as the text of this particular button is suppose dial. Okay, so text of this particular button will be a dial. So whenever I click on this particular button, I want the dialer to be launched. So what I can have here is, I'll say ID of this particular button is suppose @ +ID. I'll say dial, and as usual we'll write one on click attribute. As usual we write on click attribute, and for this on click attribute we'll write some method. Okay, so we can choose any name for the method. So let me think what name we can choose. Okay, so I'll simply call it as show. Okay, so I'll call this particular method as show. Now since show method does not exist, this particular line will show an error. Now what we can do here is we can click on this balloon and create a method show here. Now what we have basically a button, and regarding to that particular button we have the corresponding method show. So when we click on this button, it will execute the handler on click, and the corresponding method which is attached to this particular handler on click is the method show. So it will automatically call this corresponding method show here. Okay, now we'll try to launch a dialer. So for that we'll create one intent. So let's say intent I is equal to new intent, and for this we'll set I dot set action. Now for launching a dialer, the action will be action underscore dial. Okay, so what you can write is intent dot action underscore dial, because we already said all of the actions are the static member of the intent class. Now, once we do that, we can say start activity, and for this particular start activity, I'll be passing the corresponding intent object as a parameter. So we can say start activity I. Now let's try to run this. Okay, before that I launch a device. So device is launched. Now let's wait till the application gets installed. So Gradle build basically takes some time initially in order to configure and build your application. Now when you run it at the very first time, it will only take the time. Afterwards, it will install only with the changes. So afterwards operation will be faster. As you can see, it has built and it has launched the application. Now if you click on dial, as you can see, it is launching the dialer. Okay, it is launching the dialer. Now basically what we have to do here is we have to launch another application. So let me choose the navigation bar so that I can operate easily from my desktop. Okay, now what is the next common intent? So the next common intent that I have is nothing but the making a call. Okay, so for that we have to take one more button. So in order to add a button, we need to go to the layout XML file, and inside the same row I'll be adding one more button. So let me simply copy this particular button and paste this button here. Okay, now as you can see, one error is present here. The reason behind that is the both button has a same ID, which is not allowed. So I need to change the ID of second button. Let's try to call it as call, because this button is used for the calling. Okay, and also I'll change the text on this particular button. Let's call this text as call, because again we are making use of this particular button in order to call someone. Okay, so by using this particular intent, you can make a call from your app. You can make a call from your app. Okay, now as you can see, basically the on click listener given to this particular button is also shown. Okay, now the important thing is both the buttons has an attribute called as on click, and for the attribute or for the handler of on click I have given the same method. Okay, now the question is whether this thing is possible or not. Whether this thing is possible or not. Can two buttons have a same method for the on click attribute? This is the question from my side. Whether the two buttons or more than one button can have a same method for the on click attribute. So I can say whenever I'll click on the dial button, show method will execute. Whenever I'll click on the call button, again show method will execute. So whenever I'm clicking either on dial button or on call button, in both the cases the method that will get executed is show. Now the question is it possible that we can have one method for the on click attribute for more than one buttons? Yeah, please reply in the chat box. It is possible that or not. Okay. So here is the method that you can see on your screen, and then you can tell me the answer. Yeah. So Kiran Patil says yes. Okay. Why is it possible? Why is it possible? Now the thing, if you see about this particular method, is this method is not a plain method, or you can see this method is no argument, not a no argument method. This method takes an argument. This method takes an argument of type view. Okay, so this method will take an argument of type view. So what will happen in this case? Whenever we click on any button, whenever we click on any button, and we invoke the on click handler for that particular button, okay, it will call a show method. That we know. But whenever it will call a show method for the on click handler on this particular button, then the reference of this button, then the reference of the button on which we have clicked, then the reference of the button on which we have clicked will be passed as a parameter to this particular show. Okay, so what do you mean by that? If I click on the button dial, the reference of the dial button will be passed as a parameter to show. Okay, because the on click handler here is initialized to the method name as show. When I click on the button call, yes, it will call the method show because we have set the on click handler to show. But while calling the show method, since we have clicked on the button call, it will pass the reference of call button to the method show. Okay, so we can say that whenever we are clicking on the button dial, the corresponding view parameter will contain the reference of dial button, and whenever we'll click on the call button, this particular parameter view will contain the reference of call button. So always remember, whenever we are invoking the on click attribute on any of the method, okay, and when we click on the corresponding component, always that component will be passed as a parameter to the corresponding handler method. Okay, now here we can identify each of the buttons based on this particular parameter. Okay, now how to do that? Now we know here inside the main.xml, each of our button has the id. So the first button with the text dial has the id as dial. Okay, the second button with text call has the id as call. So if I'm passing the corresponding reference, from this particular reference, I can specify or I can get the ID of the button. So let's try to see how we can do that. So we can say int ID is equal to view dot, I'll call it as get ID. Okay, now how you can identify the dial button is passed? Okay, so if the dial button is clicked, then the dial button's reference will be passed as a parameter, and then this id, that is the view of the get id of view, will match the id of the dial button. So we can say that if id of if id of view that is stored inside the int id is matching with r dot id dot the id of the dial button, r dot id of dial, then I can say which button is clicked, that's a dial button is clicked. Then we can launch the intent for a dial button. So I can say intent I is equal to new intent I dot set action is equal to action underscore dial, and then I can start activity as I. That's it. Now let's try to run the code and see whether this thing works or not. Okay, my device is disconnected. Let me check it. There is some problem with the device. Let me try to check what's happening here. Uh, yeah, the device is again now in connection. I will try to run our app. Now, as you can see, the app is launched, and when we click on the dial button, it will basically launch a dialer. Okay. Now, the important thing is I need to identify the call button. Now, how you can identify the call button? So simple thing. So if the ID equals r dot id dot the caller button ID is call, then I can launch a different intent. So I can say intent I is equal to new intent, and here in order to make a call I need to give a different action. So I can say I dot set action intent dot action underscore call. So I can say intent dot action underscore call. Okay. Now only giving the action call is not sufficient. We need to specify the number to which I want to call. So here you can specify the actual data. So I dot set data, and you can specify the data in this way. So basically you can see the data for the telephone number will start with typically with TEL colon, and I can give the telephone number here. So I can give the telephone number here. Now, as we already said, the data we have passed in terms of the string, but the set data requires the data in terms of the URI. So we can simply click on the Alt Enter, and it will give us the suggestion that wrap the corresponding member with the help of URI.pass. It will pass that corresponding data, and then we'll click on the start activity, and whatever the intent that we have created inside this if block will pass here it as a parameter. So start activity I. Now let's try to run it again. Yeah, so let's try to run this code again. I don't know, so there is some technical issue. My device is getting disconnected every time. I don't know why this is happening. Let me check it. Yeah, so now you can see the device is connected again. Now let's see what will happen when we click on the call button. So let's see, when we click on call button, it will say the corresponding application has stopped. Okay, now let's try to launch it again and see what happens. Okay, so again I'll click on call. It's saying the corresponding application keeps stopping. Okay, now whenever you observe such kind of activity, always remember this is something called as the exception. So your application is terminating while the running. So basically this is nothing but an exception. So how you can resolve the exception? So this can be resolved simply by searching it into the logcat. Okay, so let's see how we can search it. So we'll go to the logcat simply, and we'll search for the exception keyword. We'll search for the exception. Okay, now here you can see the exception is found at the main activity.java line number 33. Okay, so this is the activity, this is the line where the exception is generated. Now let's try to read the exception description here. Now if we search and go on reading, you will find here the exception is caused by java.lang.security exception. So this is basically exception related to the security. Now what it says further, it says there is a permission denial. Okay, so basically you will not have the direct permission to call someone via your app. So this is one of the security feature of the Android. Okay, so unless and until you request the corresponding feature or corresponding features permission towards the user, and unless and until the user allows that particular permission, you are not allowed to use that corresponding feature. Okay, so the first thing is, in order to perform the call via your app, you need to request the permission for calling. Now, where to do that? We know all the permissions should be given inside one file, and that is called as the manifest. So we'll go to the manifest file, and remember, before the application tag, so this is the application tag we have. So this is the starting of application tag, and this is the closing of application tag. So whenever you are requesting the permission, it should be outside of the application tag. So usually we write it before the starting of application tag. So here you have to use a tag, and that is called as users permission. That is called as users permission. Now the permission that we want to request is to call. So we'll request the permission of android.permission.call. Okay. Now let's try to run this. Yeah, there is some problem with the device connection. It keeps disconnecting. Let me check what's actually happening here. So let me add this call phone. Yeah, and let me connect the device physically again. Yeah. Now, as you can see, the app is launched now. Now, when we go to the app, again it is disconnected. Sorry for that. So again, you can see when I install the app with the corresponding permission, you have to just go for the app info, and inside the app info, you have to go to the permissions menu. Now, when we go to the permissions menu, there you can see there is one permission regarding to the phone. Now you have to allow that permission. Okay, so let's see how we can allow that permission is. So as you can see, there is one permission, and we are simply allowing that permission, and we'll coming back and launch our application. The device keeps disconnecting. Yeah. Now we'll go to the app, and now we'll perform the call. As you can see, it will launch the call for the corresponding caller application for the corresponding telephone number that we have inserted. Okay. So basically, this is how you can perform functionality from your application. Now let's try to see quickly which other thing that we have. Now that is nothing but the launching the SMS. Now let's try to add the button quickly. So we'll go to the main activity XML. Now we'll copy this button and we'll paste it here. Okay, now we'll call this particular button as SMS, and the ID will give it as SMS. So you can of course give any ID and any name. Okay, the method that will execute is the same method. So rather than creating a separate method for each button, I'll be using the same method. Now we know the ID for this particular button is SMS, so I can say if ID equals r dot id dot SMS, then I can simply invoke the intent for the SMS. So this is a comparison. And now we can say intent I is equal to new intent. Now for the SMS, the action will be send to. So set action is nothing but intent dot action underscore send to. Okay. Then the data will be I dot set data, and the corresponding data will be SMS to colon the corresponding phone number or telephone number of the user. So I'll use some common data, and I'll wrap this particular method by using URI.parse, and then we'll call start activity on I, and then we'll run the code. So again, it is disconnected. As you can see, SMS button is there, and when we click on the SMS button, it will launch the corresponding SMS application. Now the telephone number that I used is present in my contact, so it will automatically select the telephone number from the contact, as you can see. Now the next intent that we have here is basically the intent for viewing the contact. So let's try to do that. So again, we can say we'll add one more button. We'll copy this particular button and paste it here. And here I can say view contact, and then the ID, let's say contact. Okay. So again, we'll go to the main activity.java and we'll write the same block. So what we'll do here is we'll copy this block and we'll paste here. Now we compare the ID with the contact button, and then we can say, since we go to view the contact, our action will be action underscore view. Okay, and the data will be the URI of the contact. Now we know for the contacts the URI will be content colon slash slash content colon slash slash contacts slash people slash the corresponding ID of the contact. So let's write the ID as 7. Okay, because we know that ID already exists in the contact, and then we'll launch the corresponding intent. Okay, now let's try to run the app on the device. Okay, now when we click on the contact button, as you can see, the corresponding contact is now available for view purpose. Okay, now as we said already, we have to keep only 3 buttons in a single row. We'll modify our table layout. So we'll cut this button from here and we'll add this button in a new row. So let me create a new table row and we'll add this button here. Now in order to align this button to occupy the equal space, we'll add a weight attribute. So weight of 1 for this button. So I'll add a weight of 1 for each and every button. So they will occupy the equal width in an empty space. Okay, so the same thing we'll do for the contact. Okay, and let's see what the next thing that we have. So next thing that we have, the edit contact. So for the edit contact, just change that you are supposed to do is, rather than action underscore view, you are supposed to use action underscore edit. Okay, so you can simply skip that. Okay, you can try it by your own. Now let's try to see some other thing that we have to do. Then viewing the website. Basically, in order to view the website, we require one more button. So we'll simply copy this button and paste it here. and we'll call this particular text as visit web, and we'll simply call this particular button id as web. And now inside this Java file, we'll simply copy and paste this particular if condition. So we'll copy and paste it, and now we'll compare the ID with the ID of the button whose ID is web. And now, since we want to view a web page, the action will be action underscore view, and basically for the web page, the corresponding URI for data will start with HTTP. So we'll take the website URI as kitcvk.in, and then we'll run this. Now it has launched. Now when we visit the website, as you can see, it will go to the corresponding website of kitcvk.in. This is how you can basically launch a browser from your app. Then the third thing, or the next thing that we have, is the view location. Again, we already know that how to do. We will simply copy this if condition and we'll paste it here. And for the view purpose of the coordinates, or for the map, we require geo colon, and then first we have to give the latitude and then the longitude. So latitude for Kolhapur is 16 point something, so you can give anything 16 point, and the longitude for the Kolhapur or our city is 74 point. Again, you can give some value here, approximate value here, and we'll add the corresponding button here. So we'll copy this button and again paste it below, and then we can call this particular button as map. So in visit website, I'll call it as view location, and we'll call this particular button as map, or ID of this button as map, and modify here the comparison of ID for this button to be compared with the map. Now we'll try to run the app. Yeah, so app is launched, and when we click on view location, as you can see, it will by default launch the Google Maps app for that. Now no need to worry if the Google Map is not available. You can install some other map activity, such as Here Maps is there. For India, there is a specific application that is called as the Map My India. So this is a freely available API that you can use in your application. Now let's try to see what additional thing that we are supposed to do. So the next thing, that is how we can send email via our app. Okay. So in order to send an email, let's try to add more button. So we'll go to the layout.xml, and since we said that we'll have 3 buttons in a single row, we have to take a new table row now. Now inside this table row, I'll copy the button here and paste. Now for this particular button, I'll be calling it as send email. For this button, I'll be calling it as send email, and the ID I'll be calling it as main. Okay. And inside the main activity.java, I need to write the corresponding if condition for sending a mail by comparing the ID. So I can say if ID of the view is matching with the ID of the button, that is the ID of button is email or mail. Okay. Now in order to send an email, you need to have the action as action underscore send to. Okay, and the corresponding data URI should be mailed to. Okay, and what will be the parameter to this particular URI? the mail to along with the destination email ID. So let's say I'll call something as suppose kapse.ajay@kitcwiki.in, and then we can run this. Now, since the URI present here is a mail to, it will automatically try to detect which application is there in my device which can be used for sending the email. If I click here, automatically you can see there are two applications which can be used for sending a mail. Either there can be Outlook or there can be a Gmail. So let me choose any of the apps. So I'll choose the Gmail, and as you can see, it will launch the corresponding Gmail app from my email ID to the email ID that I have provided inside the set data method. So it is kapse.ajay@kitcwiki.in, and as you can see, it is to the corresponding user that we have provided in a set data. So this is how you can basically send the email via your app. Okay. Now let me check what other thing that you have. So the next thing that is available is you can launch the app store for viewing a specific app through your own app. So let's try to add a button here. So we'll go to the main activity.xml. We'll select this button, and then we can add the button for let's say view app. Now I'll call this particular button ID as suppose market, or let's say app store. I'll call this ID as app store. Now the same function I'll be calling the show function, and for app store button again I need to write one more condition which will launch the corresponding intent. So I can say ID is equal to r.id dot what was the ID of that? Yeah, so what was the ID of that? The ID was App Store. Yeah, so App Store. Then, since I am supposed to view the corresponding, I'll be using view as the action, and for viewing the corresponding app, we know the URI is market. So let me check the URI once again. So URI is market://details, and the parameter is ID. Okay, so the URI is market//details, ID is equal to. Now the question is, what should be the ID? Now always remember the ID should be the fully qualified name of the corresponding app. Now the question is how to identify that. Okay, so let's say we'll use some of the ID. So we'll go here and we'll search for the common app. Let's say this is some app that I have to use, Pharma. Okay, now I need to go to this particular app, but I don't know the fully qualified name for this particular app to launch this particular app in a Play Store. Okay, so what you can simply do is you can click here and you can click on share. Okay, so you can click on share and you can choose any of your contact to share with. Okay, let me share it on the same BIT group, and when we'll go there, you can see here we have the corresponding ID of this. So what is the ID of this? The ID of says it's something called as lionic.android.com.technopharma. So I'll simply copy this. Okay, I'll simply copy this. So copy and paste will not be supported from device to here. So I'll simply see this ID and I'll write here. So it is lionic.android.com, and then we have the further thing as .com.technopharma. So dot techno pharma. Okay, now let's try to run the code and see what output that we get. Let me remove this WhatsApp application from here. Let me remove the Play Store also, and then we have the View App button. So if we click on the View App, now as you can see, it will launch the Play Store, and inside the Play Store, you can specifically see the corresponding app that's called as a Technopharma. Of course, you can see any other app. Okay, the thing is you need to find the corresponding ID of the app. Okay, so suppose if I want to see suppose this Adobe Acrobat PDF, so same thing I have to do. I need to see its ID. So I try to share it, and here you can see I can see the ID. So com.adobe.reader. So I'll simply remove this app, and here I'll give this corresponding ID. So the ID is com.adobe.reader, and let's try to run it again, and let's see whether it will launch the corresponding Adobe Reader in Play Store or not. So when you click on View App, you can see the corresponding app you can view through your app. Okay, so this is how you can basically launch any of the app through your app by making use of the implicit intent. Not necessarily the actions should belong to the intent class. There are some actions which are outside of the intent class also. There are some actions which are outside of intent class also. For example, let me tell you, suppose if you want to launch a camera from your app, okay, then that particular action is not available inside the intent class. So let's try to see. So we'll go to the main activity.xml, and we'll copy this button and we'll paste it here. And we'll say that the button launches a camera. So I'll say camera here, and then we'll go and call the ID of this particular button as cam. Now we have to compare the ID for the camera button and launch the respective intent. So we'll copy this if condition, and we'll compare with the button with the ID cam, and then we can say I dot set action is, now this action will be for a camera. Now for a camera, the corresponding action is present inside a class media store. Okay, so media store, and the corresponding action is action image capture. Okay, so if you give the corresponding action and run your app, you'll be able to see what will happen when I click on the code here. Click on the button here. So let me hold my Android device and I'll click on the camera. As you can see, if I'm clicking on camera, it will launch the camera. Okay, so basically you can even launch the camera from your app. Okay, so this is how you can do any kind of programming with the implicit intents. So implicit intents is basically you cannot provide the name of the destination component, but you can provide the additional information. You can provide the additional information other than the name of the component. Now here you can see the additional information we have provided. So the first information we have provided is the action. Sometimes we have to provide the additional information is nothing but the data, and sometimes we have to provide the additional information in terms of the extra. Okay, so this is how you can basically launch the other apps via your app. Okay, so this is how you can make use of the implicit intent to call some of the built-in apps in your Android device. Okay, now the biggest question is how Android chooses the corresponding app. So when I say the action as action underscore dial, how the Android operating system will know that the dialer application is a specific application for that. When I say the action is action view, and when I give the data as HTTP, how the Android will choose only browser for that. Why the Android will not choose any other application? The reason behind this is whenever we provide the action data or extra such kind of information, okay, the Android reads the manifest XML of each app that is installed on your device. Okay, so whenever Android OS finds that the name is not given by the developer, the Android knows that I have to choose. That is, the OS has to choose the proper application in order to handle that intent. Now, how the Android chooses the proper application to handle that intent? It will do very simple thing. It will read the manifest file of each and every app installed on that device. Okay, then by reading the manifest.xml, it will choose a proper app to handle the corresponding intent. Now, how it can choose the proper app to handle the corresponding intent? It's very simple. It will look for one tag inside the application, and that tag is nothing but the intent filter. Okay, that tag is nothing but the intent filter. Now, what do you mean by intent filter? Okay, why it is used? That particular thing we'll try to see in the next lecture. So our current lectures, limitation was we are only limiting ourselves to the implicit intents. Now the thing that is intent filter, which is based inside the manifest.xml, okay, that we'll try to see in the next lecture. We'll stop here. Uh, Before that, if you have, yeah, before that, if you have any doubt, you can ask. Yeah, so Kaushik is asking why does the app is not asking for the permission? Why we have to open the settings and need to give the permission manually to the app? Yeah, so this is basically a coding part. So whenever you have to request the app, this is again the coding part. So whenever you, Kaushik, are you online? Are you able to hear me? Yeah, I am answering your doubt. Yeah. So Kaushik, whenever you see there are some apps which are requesting for the permission by generating a dialog, this is not a built-in functionality. This is basically created by the developer. Yes, we are actually going to do that, but this thing is not possible to do unless and until we study the event handling and the dialog boxes. Okay, so currently, since we haven't studied the event handling and the dialog boxes completely, we cannot create such kind of functionality. Okay, of course, we are going to do that. We are going to generate the dialog boxes which are asking for the permissions, but that can be done once we study the event handling and the dialog boxes. So of course, when we cover that, we'll be doing that particular demo also. Okay, I hope Kaushik I answer your doubt. Okay, thank you. If you have any other doubt, please ask. Still, we have 5 minutes in our hand. Otherwise, we can stop. Yeah. So there is one action. There is one doubt. What happens when more than one ID is provided? I haven't understood your doubt. What happens when more than one ID is provided? Shubham, can you elaborate your question? Where we are providing that particular one ID, more than one ID. So if we want to provide more than one ID, where we are actually providing more than one ID. No, for a button we can specify only one ID. Okay, and here you can see I have used a single method. I have used a single method to handle the multiple buttons. Just I need to compare the IDs. Just I need to compare the IDs. I think Shubham, I'm not able to get your question. What you are trying to ask. It will be better. It will be better if you call me and ask me the doubt, because I'm not able to get your questions by reading the chat box. Okay. So that's it for today. We'll stop our lecture for today. In the next lecture, we are going to start with the intent filters. Okay, so bye.